In 1969, a man digging a well beneath an ordinary garden in Tallinn reportedly hit something hard and metallic. The find would eventually attract years of Soviet scientific and military attention and become known as Object M. But there is a problem. Modern testing of a supposed piece of that object says it was an ordinary human-made alloy. So did science solve the mystery, or did it test the wrong piece of metal? And there's an even more frustrating twist. More than half a century later, the obvious modern test, ground-penetrating radar, still hasn't been carried out in the garden because the current owner wants nothing to do with it. So what, if anything, is actually still down there? Welcome to Aliens Explored. Slightly different one today. We're a couple of days later than usual because Neil wasn't able to join me for our planned recording this week. So I'm flying solo, and I found a story that I think is absolutely perfect for it. Because underneath an ordinary garden in Estonia may still be the answer to one of the strangest UFO mysteries to come out of the Soviet era. The story begins in Merivälja, a quiet suburb of Tallinn, which in 1969 was part of Soviet-controlled Estonia. The homeowner, Virgo Mitt, was digging a well at Hobbikus T34 when at somewhere around 6.5 to 8 metres down, he reportedly hit a very hard layer. Later accounts describe something grey and plate-like, smooth on top, rougher underneath, and difficult enough to break that Mitt used a pneumatic hammer to get through it. He collected fragments of the material, and at least some of them eventually found their way into geological hands. And this is where a strange garden obstruction gradually became a UFO story. By the 1980s, the material was being examined by scientists across the Soviet Union. Accounts associated with the case claimed unusual composition and strange physical effects, and eventually something much bigger beneath the property. Later versions of the story describe Soviet researchers, military personnel, and the KGB becoming involved, with excavations continuing on and off for years. Some accounts even describe an oval object perhaps 15 metres long buried beneath a house and garden. But that's where we need to put the brakes on slightly. The fact that Soviet institutions investigated something is interesting. It does not establish that something was a spacecraft. And many of the most extraordinary claims, anomalous effects, impossible metallurgy, even suggestions of non-human technology, come to us through later reports and recollections rather than a neat chain of publicly available scientific evidence. And in 2017, the story took a fairly substantial hit. Scientists at Tallinn University of Technology analysed a piece of metal held in the Geology Institute's collection and associated it with the Merivälja find. Using modern X-ray fluorescence analysis, they found roughly 68% chromium, 23% iron, 7% nickel, with the remainder made up of other elements. Their conclusion was distinctly un-alien. The sample was clearly artificial and most likely ferrochrome, the sort of alloy used in steel production to improve resistance and corrosion to wear. One proposed explanation was that the material from the old Becker shipyard had been buried in the area. Researchers also pointed out that pyrite, a naturally occurring mineral found in Estonia, can produce a metallic-looking layer and can be extremely hard to break through. So, case closed? Well, not quite, because the same researchers added one extremely important caveat. They could not be completely certain that the piece they tested was actually one of the fragments Virgo Mitt dug out in 1969. And suddenly, the mystery changes. So the question is no longer simply, is this strange metal extraterrestrial? It becomes, do we actually know that this is the strange metal? That uncertainty is one reason Object M has resurfaced in 2026. Estonian filmmaker and author Mart Sander has published a new book on the case, and Ross Coulthart's reality check has brought it to a much wider international audience. More recently, astrophysicist Beatrice Villarroel and explorer Dennis Asberg visited the Merivälja property themselves. They spoke to a neighbour who remembered years of activity around the house, and they approached the current homeowner. He was not interested. According to Villarroel, he told them he didn't believe the story and just did not want to be involved. Now that matters because the cleanest next step is almost embarrassingly obvious. Don't dig up the garden. Scan it. Ground-penetrating radar could at least tell us whether there is a large coherent structure beneath the property worth investigating. At the moment, permission for that test has not been given, which means we have an extraordinary claim sitting in a very ordinary evidential limbo. So where do I land on Object M? Well, at the moment, I think the evidence for a buried non-human craft is very, very weak. The 2017 analysis matters. If that sample genuinely came from the original find, then the exotic material argument is in serious trouble. Ferrochrome is not alien technology. It's an industrial material. And the shipyard explanation is not a desperate skeptical invention created 50 years later. There's a perfectly plausible historical route by which industrial material could have ended up beneath the area. But the provenance problem stops me going all the way to case closed and dismissing it. If we can't demonstrate that the tested sample came from the layer that Mitt encountered, then analysing it tells us what that particular lump of metal is, not necessarily what sits beneath the garden. And that, for me, is the genuinely interesting part of Object M. Not claims about ancient surveillance stations, alien occupants, or impossible Soviet metallurgy. And those are fascinating stories, but the public evidence simply doesn't get us there. The real mystery is much smaller and much more testable. So what did Virgo Mitt actually hit in 1969? Was it pyrite, buried industrial material, some larger man-made structure? And is any of it still there? Because unlike many UFO mysteries, this one may have an actual address, and potentially a very simple experiment. So I'm going to propose a question of the week, which is this. If the supposed surviving sample is probably ordinary industrial ferrochrome, but we can't be certain it came from the original object, is Object M effectively solved? Or would you still want to see a proper ground-penetrating radar survey before closing the case? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoy Aliens Explored talking extraordinary UFO claims and taking them seriously without deciding the answer before looking at the evidence, make sure you subscribe to the channel and like this video. Until next time, keep watching the skies.